With over 7 billion people in the world, it's hard to imagine there are places not a single soul calls home. But the truth is, there are certain cities, towns, or entire islands where life has other plans. Whether it's because of political reasons, financial instability, or a greater disaster, people flee and never return, leaving the place to decay, frozen in time. As years go by, these abandoned places acquire a certain creepiness, with rumors of terrible things happening within their empty walls and streets. Welcome back to the Creepy Archives, a series where we're diving into some of the most disturbing events, media, and places that will leave you feeling uneasy. Today we're taking a trip around the world to check out some of the creepiest abandoned places. Some have been demolished to make way to new life. Others are still standing, empty and lifeless, surrounded by mystery. But all of them were, at one point, abandoned of all life. Let's discover why. Just outside Mexico City, there's an inhabited piece of land that has attracted the attention of many explorers in the past few years. Along its numerous canals, there's a small island known in the area as La Isla de las Muñecas, or the Island of the Dolls. A tiny stretch of land covered, just like its name suggests, in hundreds of old dolls. They hang from the trees, covered in moss. Some are missing an eye or an arm. Others are still dressed in the clothes that were once shiny and new, and today are grey and torn. It's said that there are approximately 2,000 dolls hanging from the trees all over the island, staring with empty eyes at the forest. But how did these creepy dolls end up covering the inhabited island? Here is what the legend says. The island was not always abandoned. The owner of the land, Don Julián Santana Barrera, used to live in a house in the center of the island. He worked the land and sold his vegetables in the towns nearby. One day, the body of a young girl washed up in the shores of the island, apparently after drowning in the canals. Santana was very superstitious, and after finding the body of the girl, he became paranoid. He was convinced the girl's spirit was haunting him, and that he could hear her crying out for her doll. Since a doll had also been found floating near the body, Santana assumed it belonged to her, and her spirit was claiming it back. So in order to keep her spirit happy, he hung the doll on one of the trees as a sign of respect. This seemed to keep the spirit away, but after a few days, it was back to haunt him. So Santana began searching in the shores and in between the garbage of nearby islands and towns, and began collecting old dolls he would then hang up on the trees in his island. He was convinced every doll he was hanging up was being taken over by the spirit of a deceased child, so he continued to hang more and more over the years. After decades, he became so haunted by the spirits he barely left the island and became a hermit who would talk to his dolls. From the 1950s until his final days in 2001, he hung approximately 2,000 dolls all over the island. In 2001, he passed away after suffering a heart attack, and according to some, it happened in the same place where the girl's body had been found years earlier. After his death, the island became abandoned. However, the dolls, which were visible from the lake, became a haunting mystery that both locals and tourists wanted to see up close. Nobody has lived on the island since, except for the dolls, which remain just where Santana left them, keeping away the spirits of the children who passed away too early. How about you? Have you ever visited a creepy abandoned place? Leave a comment and share your story with us. With nearly 4 million in population, New Taipei is the most populated city in Taiwan, and along its north coast stands the district of Sanzhi, an area around 20,000 people call home. And right here, in this district, stood the famously haunted Sanzhi UFO houses, a futuristic estate built in 1978, made of rounded houses stacked up on top of each other. The buildings had a certain similarity to the image of UFOs everyone had, and were a part of a real estate venture that planned to make a lot of people rich. Created for the North American military destined in Taipei, these houses were planned to be turned into their new vacation homes. Complete with an underground car park, a water park with slides and artificial caves, and beautiful large gardens, these houses were meant to offer a luxury retreat. Although the houses were all the same, they were painted in different bold colors, Each building was composed by different rounded glass modules, built around a hollow pillar that contained the stairs to access the home. However, nobody actually ever stayed in the Sanzhi UFO houses. The development was never actually completed, and it was haunted from the very beginning. The original idea of building these luxury houses came from Yuko Chow, a local businessman looking for an idea that would make him rich. By bringing these famous homes into Taipei, the venture was bound to be a hit, but as soon as construction started, disaster struck. The day the construction team arrived, they were greeted by a very large local. A huge stone dragon stood in the area where they were supposed to start digging. Since they were eager to begin, they decided to break the dragon in half to remove it, and superstition says this was the beginning of the end. Dragons represent a huge part of sacred symbols in Chinese mythology, and ruthlessly breaking one in half is definitely not a good omen. But the break in the cosmic balance didn't stop there. When they started digging, they came across hundreds of skeletons buried in the ground. During the 17th century, Taiwan was occupied by the Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, and Dutch, and it was these Dutchmen who fought a bloody battle they lost, and many of the bodies had been buried there, in Sanzhi. The disturbance of hundreds of souls is another part of the superstitious theories that explain why the Sanzhi UFO houses were doomed from day one. During the first months of construction, the coast suffered the fury of a typhoon. As it turns out, the material and the equipment workers were using were not prepared for the harsh weather conditions the area of Sanzhi suffers. The structure of the homes was compromised many times and required constant repairs that cost a fortune. But the real problem started when the workers who were building the luxury homes began to pay the consequences of this haunted venture with their lives. 20 men died during the 2 years of construction. From simple falls or accidents involving heavy machinery to fever or heart attacks, one by one, the workers began to experience all sorts of tragic outcomes. The road that passed right next to the building site also experienced a spike in traffic accidents while construction was happening. With all the accidents and deaths they witnessed, many workers decided to abandon the project and find work somewhere else. Although it was in a very advanced state of construction, the lack of workers willing to continue, as well as the cost of all the accidents in the past 2 years, made the company declare bankruptcy in 1980 and abandon the almost completed site. The locals were convinced the area was haunted, and nobody wanted to get close to it, leaving these creepy-looking homes to stand completely empty and alone. In 1989, a local beer company tried to save the project by turning it into a large theme park and vacation resort. However, just like it happened a decade earlier, as soon as construction began, a storm hit the coast, there were a series of earthquakes, and some workers even said they saw dark figures floating around the sky, laughing and screaming at them. It wouldn't take long for that project to also be abandoned. And so, the Sanzhi houses stood incomplete. For years they attracted the attention of photographers and urban explorers who wanted to see the retro-futuristic homes and feel the creepiness that surrounded the area after so many terrifying stories. But as time went by and more storms hit the north coast of Taipei, the lack of maintenance on the buildings uncovered a new threat: collapse. Local authorities decided to demolish the homes before someone got hurt, and in 2009, the Sanzhi UFO houses were taken down before anyone had ever spent a single night in them. Life in the desert is very challenging, and although some cities and towns make it work, others end up losing population until one day the town is completely empty. This is what happened deep in the desert of Namib, in southern Namibia. The town of Kolmanskop was a settlement established in the early 1900s by German miners who found diamonds in the area. The town grew fast and had all sorts of amenities, such as schools, theaters, hospitals, and even public transport that connected the settlement with other coastal towns. During its first 20 years, Kolmanskop was considered one of the wealthiest communities in the world. The area was so rich in diamonds, you could even find them by just grabbing a handful of the sand you were walking on. However, just like with all the other limited resources on our planet, after years of ruthless mining, by the 1930s, the diamonds became harder and harder to find, and by the 1940s, the fields were completely empty. Since the town's economy was built surrounding the diamond extraction, many miners moved to other areas where the fields were still full, and the population of Kolmanskop began to drop gradually. By 1956, the last families left the town, and it became officially abandoned. Like we mentioned earlier, life in the desert isn't easy, and it comes with many challenges, especially one which is very hard to control: sand. With no human interference to clean or repair the buildings and constructions, the sand began to take over, making its way through broken windows and doors. With every sandstorm, the houses, hospitals, casinos, operas, everything became completely covered in sand. The sun ate away all the paint, and the wind tore up the roofs. The town was not only frozen in time, it was swallowed by the desert. Today, Kolmanskop is a restricted area that belongs to the diamond corporations that once controlled all the mining. However, access is allowed to tourists and photographers and other curious minds who want to see the town taken over by sand. The atmosphere of abandonment is haunting, and it's hard to believe someone ever lived within those sand-covered walls. There's something inherently creepy about a place left to decay. What if the place where you are right now became abandoned in a few years? What do you think would cause it? Let's discuss that in the comments. Thank you for watching this episode of the Creepy Archives. All the episodes are gathered in a dedicated playlist as they're released. Don't forget to like if you found it interesting and subscribe for more creepy stories. See you in the next one.